I'll jump back in here.
Alrighty.
We drove her to a cheap motel in town and checked her in. Her mental state had already seemed to have improved in that short amount of time being away from that house. She smiled and told us she couldn't wait to finally get a decent night of sleep without having to worry about that thing banging on the doors. I think mostly she was just glad she wouldn't have to be afraid anymore. The entity she was convinced was lurking in her house. We both smiled at her and said goodbye, getting in the cruiser and driving away. Our smiles faded as soon as we pulled away from the motel. We both drove in grim silence. We both liked old Miss Garrity, in spite of all the time she had made herself a nuisance to the police department with her bogus calls and her erratic behavior. We were sorry her mental state had deteriorated to such a point where she could no longer look after herself. We told the chief her story when we got back. He sighed sadly and nodded, agreeing that she had to be committed somewhere. Tomorrow, him and me were going to drive out there personally, visit her son and daughter, and explain to them what was going on. And if they still refused to do what needed to be done, the chief would see to it himself that Miss Garrity would get the help that she needed. But we never got the chance. The last time we ever saw Miss Garrity was when Jerry and I left her at the motel. Around 4 a.m. the next morning, I was awakened by an urgent phone call from the chief, telling me to get over to the motel as soon as possible. He wouldn't say why over the phone, but I already had a hunch it had something to do with Mrs. Garrity. I felt an awful sense of dread as I got dressed. I wondered if maybe she had taken her own life in the motel room after we had left her. When I arrived outside the motel, my fears were confirmed when I saw crime scene tape blocking the door to Miss Garrity's room. The chief, along with Jerry, Pete, and Vance, were gathered outside, along with a couple cops from the state police and a pair of detectives from the city. The chief greeted me with a grave expression as I approached him. He told me Mrs. Garrity was gone. At first, I thought he meant she was dead. Then, seeing the solemn look in his eyes, he clarified himself. She was literally gone. I looked at him confused. I saw something in his eyes that I had never seen before, something that caused a ripple of fear in my heart. The chief was scared. He told me he didn't know what to make of it himself. People in the neighboring rooms had heard blood-curdling screams and sounds of violence coming from Mrs. Garrity's room around 2 a.m. Then nothing. Silence. They had called the police department. Pete and Vance had been the first to arrive since they were on the night shift. They had pounded on the door, but there had been no response. They had to force the door open. When they saw what was inside, they called the chief himself. What did they find? I asked. Maybe you ought to come see for yourself, he told me, leading to the doorway and under the crime scene tape. He explained to me that they had found no sign of forced entry and that the door and windows of the motel room had all still been locked from the inside when Pete and Vance showed up. I took a look around, feeling a shiver run through my body. There was fresh blood splattered around the room, on the walls, the floor, the bed, even the ceiling. The blood-stained bed sheets had been ripped away from the mattress as if somebody had desperately tried holding onto them as they were pulled off of the bed. There were 10 very thin trails of blood on the carpet, leading away from the bed. 10 thin trails of blood that had been made by 10 terrified fingers clawing as if they were being dragged away. I followed the bloody finger marks across the floor, away from the bed, to where they led, where they ended. At the closet. I looked at them, then I looked at the chief. He looked back at me, his face hard and impassive, but I could see fear in his eyes. I approached the closet. The door was standing open. I stood there, looking in for some time. The closet was empty, completely empty. There wasn't even blood on the floor. They never found Mrs. Garrity.
Such a nightmarish looking scene that's been described here.
It's just changed so much from when we just had that recap. It was a positive thing. They were going to get her help. They were going to talk to her family the next day. And if the family wasn't going to help, they were still going to make sure she got help, basically.
Yeah.
And everything seemed, I don't want to say good because I think they were really sad about the situation. But for Mrs. Garrity herself, it seemed like she was going to get help.
It was like a bittersweet thing, right? They didn't want to have to do it, but they were willing to do it because that's what she needed.
Yeah, that's not an easy thing to do, to like This person can no longer live at their house, take care of themselves. It's a pretty sad thing when you really think about it. But she's relieved, though. They, like we said last time, they leave her at the motel room. Everything seems to be okay. She seems to be looking up. They said instantly her aura, she just seemed to be in a way better place.
Yeah. And then this nightmarish outcome.
He's awoken by a phone call at night saying he needs to get to the motel as soon as possible. He thinks the worst, right? She's dead. She's taken her life. Something terrible has happened to her. Can you imagine that drive over there?
Yeah, I was thinking about that. That would be like a very dark and like terrible time in your own head driving over there to this, because like, yeah, you just saw this person. You were trying to get her help, and then it's like either she died of apparent suicide, or this could have been natural causes. She could have had a heart attack. But to think that you just saw her not that long ago.
And that drive over there, you're wondering what happened the whole time. He gets there, he sees a lot of people there. He sees all of his fellow coworkers. There's only a few of them, I guess, for the local police department. But he also sees state police and a detective from a nearby bigger city. So you pull up, you see that, you think, oh shit.
Yeah, it definitely seems like something else happened, or it's a little bit more involved. But you wouldn't have expected that. You would definitely never expect that.
Then he's told that they heard blood-curdling screaming and like what sounded like an altercation, like a violent fight, like something crazy was happening in her room. The neighboring motel rooms heard. Then it went completely silent.
What I find interesting is it even mentions it specifically that when Pete and Vance, the night shift guys, show up, the door is locked.
Yeah.
The doors and windows are all locked. So
they had to force themselves in.
Yeah, they break in to get in there and see what was going on. And then the scene of all that blood on everything, everywhere, and then where her fingernails have been dragging across the floor, trying to stop herself from being dragged away. All that blood there, too. Horrific scene.
So let's talk about the doors and the windows real quick. So you definitely can't go out a window, then lock it behind you that I'm aware of.
No.
I don't know what these hotel room doors are like either. A lot of the ones I've been to, they lock on their own. You have a key card. This sounds like an old motel, though. They actually have that like deadbolt on the inside. So it makes you wonder, like, could you truly leave and lock it? But this is an old room, you think. So it's got to be confusing, nevertheless.
Well, also the question of whether or not it had one of those, they usually have the deadbolt, but they also have like the hasp block, too.
Yeah.
Was that locked as well? I don't know. But yeah, so like maybe the door could have relocked. If it's an older one, like you said, it has a key, an actual key that they don't relock. So that's a good question. This is a very small town, so I can't imagine they have the most up-to-date doors.
This is where it gets weird, like you said. The bed sheets had been ripped off the bed, and the blood and all that actually does not lead to the door, indicating that she was dragged outside and taken away. There's actually like finger marks off of this bed that lead clear across the floor to the closet. Not the door or window like she was forced out to leave, to the closet. And then upon getting at the closet, nothing. They stopped there.
Yeah. And that is like, you look at that and you're like, the body's going to be in the closet, right?
Yeah.
But we quickly find out that that's not the case. And that makes everything even more terrifying, in my opinion.
Yeah, but she's been so afraid of these damn closets the whole time, man.
The whole time you have some sort of thing that's supposed to be in this closet that's been threatening her for weeks now, that it's gotten worse and worse to the point that she actually shot at the closet door at her house, tried to stop it. And then it told her tonight.
It told her tonight.
And then it's that night, this happens in that room, and you see what appears to be evidence of her being dragged to the closet.
You always hear of these things that like something demonic haunts somebody or something. It's not just where they live, it's like attached to them. That seems to be the case for Mrs. Garrity here.
It does seem to be, yeah.
Of course, she was never found again.
Yeah, and there was no blood or anything in that closet.
It's like she's dragged to the closet, then just vanished.
Yeah.
God, She was so afraid of those closets too the whole time. And that was
Yeah.
going to be what got her. She thought she got away from it.
Yeah.
Imagine being those people next door hearing that.
That would be a very terrifying night.
You know, all you could do is call the police and
Never go back to that town again.
yeah. A small town where nothing hardly happens. Do you think this sticks with the people that were involved forever?
Oh, yeah. This would be something that they'll never get over. This
And
is something that will affect them for the rest of their lives and will probably affect people who weren't necessarily there, but who will hear about it later.
She's still missing. We don't know if she's dead. We could presume, I guess.
Yeah.
It's crazy how this progressed over time when you really think about it. It's just a lady living out in her house alone, and all this has just happened. I can't imagine how terrifying it was.
It's definitely, it goes, like I said, it goes from 0 to 60 like that. It's like craziest thing you'll ever hear.
Absolutely. This guy actually years later posted yet another story, so we will go back to that. He had something else crazy happen. So this is what he was saying. Craziest thing that's happened. How long did he say? He say 12 years? 10 years? How long did he be in this cop? 12 years. He had been a cop in this town for 12 years. And this is really the case that haunts him, that sticks out to him. The rest of the stuff is pretty typical, pretty normal. This is not normal, though, man.
No, it's definitely not. It's pretty much the opposite.
Years later, he has something else, too, and we'll share that one day. I'm excited about that.
Yeah, that'd be awesome. I can't wait.
This is a story that leaves on the ultimate cliffhanger.
Yeah, it does. Terrible cliffhanger, and one that, I don't think will ever be solved.
Jeff Townsend Media. CG, good night.
And the question is, do I stay here? Will you be back? Are you gonna come back? Will you be back? Are you coming back?